Listen up, get ready, I'm not gonna take no more. There's a revolution, a revelation going on in my soul. Buckle up, get ready, we're not gonna say.
Hey, welcome back to Live from the Heartland for the week of the 18th of May, and we are recording it on Monday. And I'm really glad to bring on one of our producers, sometimes a host, Thom Clark, who's been coming on every month and giving us a roundup with his perception, opinion, understanding of events going on. And I had the honor of riding with him to that aforementioned memorial for Lou Kreinberg on Saturday. And one of the things that Thom told me about then, and it's pretty exciting, was some awards that Chicago journalists got. So let's start off with that, Thom. Talk about great journalism here in Chicago.
Well, it's sort of insider news, but it was a heavy week for nonprofit news outlets in particular in Chicago. The week began with Invisible Institute and a couple of other Southside media outlets winning a Pulitzer Prize, which is like the granddaddy of all of them. It's like getting an Oscar for journalism. But not to be outdone, the same story won a Peabody later in the week. And then on Thursday night, the Investigative Project on Race and Equity, which, as you know, I've been working on the last 3 years, won the prestigious BGA, Better Government Association, Driehaus Investigative Reporting Award for the year. And on Friday night, we won 3 Lissagors. Peter Lissagor was a longtime Chicago Daily News DC columnist, and this is a 40-year plus award. I got one 40 years ago, covering for my World's Fair coverage, but our traffic stop series, which ran on WBEZ and the Sun Times, as well as our own website, is what's garnering all this attention. And it's a story that keeps giving because, of course, the issue of driving while black has not, unfortunately, disappeared. So I think it's a real plus and a real sign that in this shifty media landscape, the nonprofit arena is holding its own and actually got more awards this year with national Pulitzers than traditional legacy media outlets, which says a lot about the media transition going on. So
well, that's good. We're gonna have to break some stories here. Maybe get in the running for some of that. But congratulations, Thom, and to all the journalists who make a real difference. It's been about a year since we elected a new mayor, and the progressives were all about that, and we came through. We elected a mayor, and some of the things he's done have been, people have been critical. Some things have been good. How about giving us an assessment of Mayor Brandon's first year, Thom?
Well, before folks hear my take on some of these issues, I'm drawing in part on a lengthy story in the Sunday Sun-Times to take a look back. And it was surprisingly even-handed because the City Hall reporter for the Sun-Times, Fran Spielman, and I'm not knocking her journalism, but she's not been particularly easy on the mayor, nor should she be particularly. But there were 2 other reporters on this, and I think they gave the mayor a pretty fair shake. Clearly, he stumbled on some critical issues where the progressive point of view didn't necessarily ring true. I'll begin with the migrant crisis. Lori Lightfoot left him totally unprepared in terms of how the city should be responding to what was then already an obvious growing crisis. And while he's had to shift gears a couple of times, he spent $1 million on a Brighton Park tent camp that never happened. He should be given credit for shifting gears, and after some missteps, particularly with the state and the county, actually coming up with more money to cover the migrant costs through the end of the year, and largely going to bricks and mortar buildings. The migrant count, I think, has dropped from 14,000 to under 10,000, and everybody is in a fairly decent place at the moment. The 90-day eviction stuff has started happening, but that's been handled in kind of a soft way. And of course, everyone's nervous about how many more buses from Texas will show up in July, just before our Democratic convention here. So it's not an issue that's going away. We could certainly use a comprehensive federal immigration reform bill, hopefully under the next a refreshed administration with the Democrats taking over both houses of Congress. Maybe we can get something like that done. But in the meantime, major cities, Denver, Chicago, New York, amongst them, are still dealing with an onslaught from southern states that feel that they are dealing with a crisis of too many immigrants, even though that's how this country was founded and what drives our economy. In fact, there's little doubt that we did not have a recession, but rather a soft landing, as the economists call it, because we've had so much immigrant labor coming across the border and from overseas to bring that energy, talent, intelligence to our country and to our country's economy. So
Right
I
on.
think one of the more intriguing dynamics from uh, Brandon's first year is the on again, off again uh, connections with our fraternal order of police. Um, he not only renewed their contract, but gave them a raise. Um, uh, had some other almost positive things coming out of the head of the FOP, but now they're knocking him again, and it's largely over uh, the FOPs trying to get arbitration kept behind closed doors and not open to public eyes, and that just rubs those of us who've been working on police reform for 20, 30, 40 years raw, because that's at the essence of bringing public accountability to police actions that go beyond their training and cause major problems for the city and taxpayers.
And the city council doesn't seem to be on the side of the police on this. They want more public hearings, right?
Yes, in fact, they have kept voting down even a measure that even the courts have turned over, but have revisited the issue by saying, no, we think these hearings should be public.
Right
So
on.
I suspect it'll be ultimately settled by the courts unless Springfield, which at this point would probably be in the fall, decide to make some remedial reforms in how police oversight really happens in this state.
We have an election coming up for the first time in Illinois, an elected school board or partially elected school board. What's happening with that? I know I have people knocking on my doors, getting signatures for candidates. So we're beginning to pay some attention to that. What do you got?
Well, I think this is the sleeper election that many people don't really know about, although we've been talking about elected school board for a long time. And part of it is that the rollout has been uh, kind of a juggernaut. First, we were going to elect a whole new school board, and then it was decided we'd do it partially. So Brandon would have an ability as mayor to appoint still about half the board, with the other half being elected. Um, I don't have a particular opinion about one way or the other. I appreciate what it would take to launch a whole new electoral process for all of the school board members, but we're getting there. We've been looking for this kind of oversight that every other school district in the state of Illinois has. Every other district has an elected school board. But in this city, we've always left it up to the mayor to decide what's best for public education, and often not making the right decisions. But at any rate, that's the 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 paradigm shift that we're trying to create, and we'll see with these first elections later this year how that all turns out. But I'm glad to know that there are petitioners out there, because that shows that there are people engaged and trying to take advantage of this new tool that we have for oversight of the schools.
Tom, let me ask you one of the things that we all worked on, and in our ward, in the 49th ward, we had 73% of the voters be in favor of the Bring Chicago Home resolution that would have created a fund of money from transfer tax on buildings over $1 million to go toward homelessness. Now, we lost that vote. There was a lot of big money came in from real estate interests. What's the aftermath? Because we still got homelessness. It's rampant in our city and around the country.
Well, I don't know if how soon the mayor might return, or for that matter, the city council that supported him for some kind of reform of the real estate transfer tax. Um, but I suspect the real reason it lost is that it turned into a referendum on the mayor that had actually very little to do with the
Right.
underlying issue. The real estate industry did spend a lot of money defeating this thing, mostly spreading lies. They were successful in framing this real estate transfer tax, a one-time assessment when you sell your building, as a property tax increase, which it's not. It's not a property tax. It's a transaction tax. It's much like a sales tax when you buy something at the store, whether it's groceries or a new car, you pay a sales tax to help pay for government services. Well, in this particular case, it was raising the real estate transfer tax on buildings worth more than $1 million so that we could have a permanent fund for homeless issues and for affordable housing. I don't think the mayor explained the program particularly well to gain folks that were more influenced by the real estate industry. Everybody hopes they're going to have $1 million home someday. Most of us don't. This law would not affect us. In fact, most of us would have gotten a reduction in the real estate transfer tax that once in a lifetime for most of us selling of a building, selling of a home. This was really aimed at developers who turn and churn. And I think that's a good place to get money for the homeless. So I'm sure we'll come back with some form. The Coalition for the Homeless is certainly not going to give up on it. But I think there needs to be some even more organizing and probably some more money raised to offset the power of the real estate industry the next time it comes up. He has gotten some play for redoing some debt to create a $100 million fund for affordable housing initiatives. This is a little bit different than the homeless programs. But if this gets through, it's a very significant increase in available financing for affordable housing, mostly coming from unexpended TIF funds. The mayor would like to get away with, do away with TIFs altogether, tax increment financing. But in the meantime, several TIF districts are coming up for renewal. The money's not needed for those districts, so he wants to capture that and use it for affordable housing development in other parts of the city.
Let's talk a little bit about the mayor and his relationship with the governor. They seem to cross paths, different positions on the Bears building a new stadium on the lake. We hope they get in sync, and wanted to include in this a little bit about the coming Democratic convention.
So there are three issues in there. The personal relationship between our two top political leaders. I don't want to leave Tony Preckwinkle out of the picture because she certainly is in the mix there. Um, but clearly there's been some rocky stuff. And I don't know if that's because Brandon doesn't have the right lobbyists deployed in Springfield to understand what's going on. He made a trip there last week, theoretically, to make a case for more funding for schools, but it never came up because he had not done the prep work. And he was doing it way late in the spring session of Springfield when most of the bills have already come out of committee and are now being considered over the next 2 weeks for final consideration. So it was a little bit too little, too late in terms of getting some resources for schools it was looking for. He may have mended some other fences in the 2 days he was down there, but I think as Jeanette Taylor, the alderwoman who warned us a few months ago that maybe we're good organizers, but not particularly good administrators of government, or that we weren't ready for prime time. I'm afraid that might be showing up on more issues a little bit, and it's a thin bench. I don't think that Brandon has been able to bring enough of his own people in because he's been very slow to make critical appointments, although the ones he's made have been pretty much lauded and accepted. And one of the more recent ones that I'll just note is that the new head of the Department of Planning and Development is a savvy real estate developer, and she's an African American woman who's well known in those circles. And I think this was a great find to find someone to replace what had also been a great commissioner of planning and development before her. So um, I'm encouraged by some of the moves he's making. It's just some of these things should have happened after the first couple of months, not a year later.
Any comment on the stadiums, the stadium question?
Not one thin dime. That's about all I feel the need to say.
That's good.
I'm surprised at the position that Brandon's made on this, but he may have decided he has nothing to lose to show that he's in favor of trying to keep the Sox and the Cubs. I just don't want him to spend one thin dime.
Right on.
Gazillionaires
too.
can build their own roads and sewers. We need those in other parts of the city. And I think that's the underlying tension that Brandon's had to deal with because of the migrant crisis, because he's talking about giving gazillions to build new stadiums, even before we've paid off the old Soldier Field renovation. There are a lot of folks, particularly in the Black community, who feel they've been left out. And here they have one of their own as in charge of the city, and they don't feel like they're getting their fair share in their neighborhoods. And why should we be giving money to help newcomers when we've been waiting at the door for some time. It's a potent organizing issue. I think personally, it's full of it's a bit full of holes, and some of the complaints might come back and haunt some of these older persons as they try to get help from the city down the line. But I do think the mayor needs to beef up his staff, get ready for some critical questions about the stadium. And are we going to talk about the convention?
Yeah, I was going to do that next. The convention would be, we continue to have demonstrations and encampments in support of the Palestinian people in their current situation, while Israel continues bombing where people lived and telling them to move. So we have demonstrations in Chicago, and we also have a Democratic convention coming up, and those things seem to be linked these days. Biden's support, um, he's clearly trying to lean a little bit to the left. Some people say he's got to go more to the center to be elected. What is your take on Chicago and the coming convention, given the Palestinian demonstrations? And what's ahead?
So we've heard a lot about polling in this election cycle. It seems to have been going on for 20 years now. Um, and while I still think it's a little early 6 months out to pay much attention to polls, in part because most voters aren't paying attention yet. I don't know how that could be with the trial and everything else going on. But I think a lot of people are just trying to survive and are not paying attention to the blow by blow of what the presidential candidates are doing. But there are new polls out just this morning that shows that Joe Biden's in trouble in swing states. About the only silver lining that I saw in the poll is that he is ahead in Wisconsin, but is in within the margin of error. And to my eyes, what I was worried about with these polls this morning is that the margin between him and the former president is outside the margin of error for the polls. So he has some catching up to do. And I think the state I'm most worried about, and I have been for months because of the significant Arab population outside Detroit, is Michigan.
Michigan.
And his showing in Michigan is very weak at this point, and it's clearly connected with dissatisfaction over how he's handling stuff in the Middle East. I don't know how he turns that around uh, over the next 6 months, but at the very least, I'm afraid he's going to depress the youth turnout, which is critical to his success. Um, we can see on campuses around the country, this is an issue that has galvanized younger voters. And I think the real fear I have is that they just won't show up. I don't see them voting for Trump, but I don't see them very excited about Joe Biden, notwithstanding everything he's done, including student loan forgiveness, amongst the many other attributes. I think the basic problem Joe Biden is facing is that he has not told his story well about what he's accomplished, particularly in the first 2 years of a divided Congress. So
Real quick, do you
see.
have any thoughts on the city not giving permits to demonstrating groups and some chatter around that?
Well, I don't think it's going to keep some groups from trying to get closer to the convention site or other downtown hotels where conventioneers might be staying. Um, there clearly was some success in the city creating demonstration zones around the NATO conference back in 2012. Um, I suspect that's the balancing act that the city is going to be trying, and the Secret Service is going to be trying to maintain. Both convention cities, Milwaukee and Chicago, are gearing up for demonstrations. Uh, I don't see shades of Chicago in '68 on the horizon at this moment. Uh, we're not talking about anti-war activities for people of draft age. Um, while young people are the ones who tend to get sent to war at this moment, we don't have U.S. troops on the ground, except for special forces that we never hear about in the Middle East, or for that matter, in Ukraine. But clearly, significant tax dollars are in both places. And there's a part of me that's still rooting for Ukraine. And there's a new Russian offensive now, and it's very clear they're trying to take advantage of the gap in armaments. So it's a real tough time for pacifist types like me, because I've never seen a war in my lifetime achieve the objective that the warriors set out to accomplish. We need to be talking at a negotiating table to settle this thing.
We're about to run out of time, so how about a quick minute on something that was really pleasant for a lot of people, and that would be going down to the shores of the Great Lake, Michigan, and watching the Northern Lights.
Did you get there?
I didn't. I'm too watching too much basketball or too old and going to sleep early.
Well, it was tough because the best viewing hours for a couple of nights was the middle of the night.
Yeah.
We were out there a couple of nights in the early evening as the sky got dark. We could see faint light, and my camera actually picked it up better than the naked eye. But phenomenal pictures from people with better cameras than my iPhone, showing the richness of Mother Nature still having ultimate control over our lives.
Tom, it's really good talking to you. It's been nice. It's a couple days almost in a row that we've been in touch, whether it be by Zoom or in your car. And we'll have you back next month, and I'll see you before then. Thanks a lot.
Great to catch up. Take care.
Right on, brother.